Mr. Brown and Mr. Gray. Authored, designed, and illustrated by the very talented Mr. William Wondriska. For Stephanie, back in 1968. One day the king was out for a drive in the country when his car broke down. While it was being fixed, he strolled over the green fields and met two of his subjects, Mr. Brown and Mr. Gray. "Good afternoon, Your Majesty," said Mr. Gray. "Is there anything we can do for Your Majesty?" asked Mr. Brown. "Let us sit down and talk together," said the king, "for I would like to ask one question that has been troubling me for a long, long time." Mr. Brown and Mr. Gray leaned forward. "Do you know what happiness is?" asked the king confidentially. At first, Mr. Brown and Mr. Gray thought the king was playing a joke on them. But finally Mr. Gray said, "Why, if we could have everything we wanted, it would be easy to tell you what happiness is." "Well, at least we could try," added Mr. Brown. "Very well," said the king. "I shall give you each an island of your own and the means to do anything you want there for 1 year. At the end of the year, I shall return for your answers." Mr. Gray could hardly believe his good fortune. He immediately built a 366-bedroom luxury hotel. He didn't allow any other guests, so he could sleep in a different bedroom every night in the year, including leap year. There was a soda fountain in each room, so he could eat sundaes and double banana splits all night long if he wanted. Mr. Brown was very pleased with the king's offer, because he thought Mrs. Brown would enjoy having an island. They had never owned their own home, let alone an island. But Mrs. Brown was worried. "Suppose we can't find out what happiness is?" she asked. "Then the king will have all that expense for nothing." "Well, we must do our best," replied Mr. Brown. "The king can't expect more than that, and will spend as little of his money as possible." So they built a very small cottage. "But it's cozy," said Mrs. Brown, "and the kitchen is the kind I've always wanted. Now, if I could just have fresh vegetables to cook." So Mr. Brown dug and hoed and raked a garden. "I've never seen beans with more snap or beets with more flavor," said Mrs. Brown. "But food isn't everything. Now, if we just had some flowers." So Mr. Brown went to work again. "Those hollyhocks make our cottage as pretty as a palace," said Mrs. Brown. "What a shame the king can't see it. We should have someone else to share it with." So Mr. Brown wrote a lot of letters, and 5 nieces and 5 nephews came to visit. Because it was an island, there was all the fishing and swimming anyone could want. Also, hikes and picnics and games. Mr. Brown was wonderful at thinking games. And stories. No one could tell stories like Mrs. Brown. In fact, they enjoyed themselves from dawn to dusk, and the weeks flew by. "But we still haven't figured out what happiness is," worried Mrs. Brown. Mr. Gray was absolutely sure that he would find the answer to the king's question. When he got indigestion from so many sundaes and double banana splits, he had the soda fountains removed and television sets put in the bedrooms instead. Unfortunately, although he had 366 sets, the programs were the very same on every set. So he soon got bored However, the commercials gave him some good ideas. First, he bought one of each kind of car he saw advertised. But as there was no place to drive except round and round the island, he soon got tired of that. Then he had the biggest marble swimming pool in the world put in. But he couldn't swim. He kept on ordering things, tens and hundreds and thousands of things. The hotel was overflowing, and there was no place on the island for one more thing. Then the year was up, and the king sailed up to see Mr. Brown. He looked at the cottage and the hollyhocks. He swam and fished and played games and ate delicious picnic supper prepared by Mrs. Brown. He toasted marshmallows over the campfire and listened to stories. And finally he said, "For a year you have had the means to do anything you wished. Can you now tell me what happiness is?" Mr. Brown and Mrs. Brown and their 5 nieces and their 5 nephews were silent. At last Mrs. Brown said bravely, "Your Majesty, we want to thank you very kindly for the wonderful year we've had, but I'm afraid we must give you back the island because we haven't found the answer to your question." "Well, then I hope Mr. Gray can help me," the king sighed. "But you may keep the island. It is yours forever, as my thanks for a day I have enjoyed more than any other since I became king." On Mr. Gray's island, the king picked his way between great piles of things to the hotel. He could hardly make himself heard above the noise of the 366 television sets, all turned on while Mr. Gray tried to find a program he liked. "For a year," shouted the king, "you have had the means to do anything you wished. Can you now tell me what happiness is?" "I'm getting closer to the answer every day," Mr. Gray shouted back. "But I've used up all the space on this island. Now, if I could just be king and really have everything I want, I'm sure I'd be able to give you the answer." "Well, very well," replied the king. "You may have my crown, and I'll take your island. I believe the fishing is very good." The king's last official act was to order Mr. Gray's island cleared and a small but comfortable fishing lodge put up instead of a hotel. He kept the Browns in fish, and they kept him in vegetables. And every other day he would row over and enjoy the games and Mrs. Brown's cooking. And then, one day, while they were having a picnic, they were surprised to see an enormous ship sail up to the island. The king got off and came up to them. "Do you know what happiness is?" he asked confidentially.